Hello.
Hey guys.
We wanted to do a quick review slash just kind of introducing you to this new form of travel that we're doing here in the videos.
You've seen us ride bikes a few times in the videos now, so we figured it was about time to tell you about these bikes.
So we wanted to do a dedicated video to our new mountain bikes. They're made by a brand called Revel out of Colorado, and what we both bought is called the Ranger. It's their most cross-country one of that line anyways. They have cyclocross bikes, titanium bikes, but for us, this was just sort of that perfect sweet spot, so we wanted to talk about why we bought them and what we think of them. I think we have maybe 200 miles, a little over that probably at this point, of single track on these bikes, and so we're getting to know them and wanted to share our thoughts with you. We got bikes.
Finally, they have arrived.
Don't think I've ever bought a new bike. I once won a bike when I was on a mountain bike racing team. It sounds cooler than it really was. And then I gave it to her because she needed a nice bike. Yeah. We got two. This one is Kelsey's. This one is mine. And we're so stoked because the one thing we have been dreaming about through some of the tougher times more recently, with stuff going on in their house and having to ship home and sell our home, rolling home, was I'm tired of not being in shape. Since we've started YouTube, neither of us have been in shape really. We stopped intensely riding, hiking, trail running, and all the stuff we used to do to save money for the trip. And then we did the trip, and we're still on the trip kind of. But no longer will fitness take a backseat. For us, we just don't feel good anymore. Sitting in a truck is not the best workout.
It's not worth it,
And it's time to get back in shape. And I hate running because all I can think about is how I'm running and how much I hate it. Bicycles, on the other hand, I have a lot of fun mountain biking. And even if you're not having fun, you still lose yourself because you don't want to run into a cactus or whatever, or off a cliff. And so it just forces you to focus on the task at hand. And it's my favorite way to zone out and detach from the world. Motorcycles and mountain bikes. And so, without further ado, commence time lapse.
Yeah, we're going to time lapse here while
we're putting them together.
Okay. Here we go. We get to go for a first ride.
Yes. Rides so well though too, in terms of like the rolling, just feels so good. So my background in mountain biking, mountain biked most of my life, but I wouldn't have called myself like a mountain biker until I moved to Arizona. And once I got out here, it was kind of like, what do we do now? What's the activity? And I picked really, 4x4s, yes, as you see in many of our videos, but really at the time I picked dirt bikes and mountain bikes as the recreational activity. And then after a few years, I got more serious, started racing big endurance races, 24-hour races, and I always raced single speed, rigid actually. So I always just loved the simplicity of the rigid single speed bike and these long, 100-mile, 200-mile races.
What I would call torturous.
Somewhat torturous, yeah, definitely. A lot of self-loathing to be able to do those races. But I really enjoyed it, but I always had another bike, almost always. And so my other bikes have been like Santa Cruz Super Lights, Pivot Trail 429, Trek Top Fuel, Trek Fuel. Those sort of bikes were always the secondary bike that was for more fun, and those more relate to this bike than the single speed rigid, of course. So I'm going to kind of compare this bike to those. Now, it's not really a fair comparison because I'm talking about older models of those to the current one, but I think probably still worth sharing some thoughts.
Yeah, and then for me, I just got into it mostly because of Tim. I had ridden a few times, but he was into it and I tried it and fell in love with it. So I've only had hardtails actually before this bike. So I've had carbon, steel, I think that's it as far as those go. So I don't have as much experience, but before we left for probably 3 years, we were riding maybe 5 times a week. We were riding a lot.
We were riding a lot and going to races and stuff, and that was kind of a big part of what we were doing. So for her, this is a big upgrade.
Huge.
She had some time on a Trek Fuel in Scotland, just one day, but like a 30-mile day.
Put that video here.
Yeah. And so my thoughts on this are it's sort of perfect for us. Revel also makes a bike called the Rascal that's even more well known. It was their first bike they produced, and it's really well loved, and I was tempted to go that way. I think that the me 10 years ago would have been wanting that bike. I'm really glad instead though that I went with the Ranger. It's still a lot of wheel travel. I still haven't been able to bottom it out, or if I do bottom it out and use all the travel, as you can see, it's so soft and progressive as it gets to the bottoming out. I don't even know I bottomed out.
You don't feel bad about it, yeah.
So this bike seems like it's more than enough for how I ride now and how I'm probably going to be riding in the future.
Yeah.
So I went with this slightly lighter, slightly less wheel travel, slightly more cross-country oriented bike. But I would also say that the head tube angle is just slack enough. The seat post angle is just slack enough. And what I mean by that is picture like a motorcycle chopper, and you see the front ends that are really long hanging out there. That's a slack front end. And so the further out it goes, the slower the steering goes. But it also tends to make the bike feel a little more playful and fun. You can't quite pick your way through a boulder field quite as well, but it's definitely a lot more fun. But what that also does is make it feel less cross-country racy. And so I kind of love that this bike is just sort of not cross-country enough for me to be out there trying to get the king of the mountain, which is like in these apps you can put on your phone, you can try for the fastest time on a section. And that really used to be me trying to get the fastest downhill time or the fastest climbing or whatever. And there's something about this bike, it still pedals super efficiently. And the way the rear suspension works, you don't waste any of your pedal. So it is cross-country in that sense that you can climb all day and not feel like you're hauling a downhill or an enduro bike up steep grades, which is super important when you have to pedal up a lot. We never shuttle. It's just not something we ever got into.
Yeah.
And so for us, we know any bit of downhill we're going to do, we have to pedal up. And with that in mind, I want a bike that pedals really efficiently. So that's one of the reasons I'm also really glad we went with the Ranger. In terms of the build on the bike, it's their sort of standard GX build. It's got a dropper seat post, which is really nice luxury to have. You can see Kelsey's got hers down. So when you take a break, you can just stay on the seat and stay on it. That's something I still have to get used to.
Yeah, me too. I forget I have it.
Totally. On my Pivot, I had a dropper as well, and I would forget it was there sometimes. So I'm just so used to riding cross country, I need to get my butt out of the way of this. The purpose of that is when you're going downhill, this seat post can hit you and sort of induce an over the bar situation. When you're not used to having it, you're just used to knowing it's there. So it's not a huge deal, but man, is it a nice luxury to just sit on it, even get it down a few inches, and then the whole section of downhill you're doing, you just know that it's that much further from hitting you. Both the front and rear suspension do lock out. So like if we're gonna do pavement miles to get to the trailhead, I'll go ahead and lock it out, but it's so efficient. Once you're mountain biking, there's really no point in locking it out, I find. Maybe if I were climbing like a forest road or something like that, I would go ahead and do it. But that's more just because I'm a bit obsessive about how much of my energy I might be wasting. But I've noticed when I forget to lock it out, I'll sometimes think I'm locked out, and then I go to loosen it or open it up, and it's already open.
Yeah.
And I realize, wow, this thing is that efficient. So.
And it's 120 in the front and 115 in the rear, I believe.
Yep, I think you're right. And so in terms of numbers, that's not a ton of wheel travel. I think you just have to ride a bike these days to know how that works. A bike with that much wheel travel 10 or 12 years ago would be really short travel. The way this travel works and how progressive it is throughout its stroke, it feels like a whole lot more suspension travel than that. So I absolutely love this bike build. The only modifications we've done is we throw our pedals on that we use. Kelsey uses water bottle mounts. Those are both little fancy titanium ones from one of my old bikes, I think. So other than that, it's pretty much stock. We both got these fancy bells here that you can see.
Love it.
First Cycle makes these bells, all made in America. They're a bit expensive, but man, they're just a cool piece of kit that some guys designed. There's a ton of Chinese knockoffs. Yeah. And this is one of those cases where I'm really happy to support the actual manufacturer who designed it.
Appreciate the craftsmanship.
Just love it. It's a neat little thing, and it's sort of a bit of a luxury touch that we
just
move
a
from
fun
bike
little
to bike
thing.
as we go. And Kelsey got her matching bell to mine
Christmas.
for Christmas this year. So that's kind of our setup. I do prefer clip-ins. Being a cross-country guy, I like being clipped in. Even in really rough stuff, I like being clipped in. When I want to get out, I'm able to, I find. And so for me, it's just a non-issue. But I would say at this bike or more long travel, like the Rascal, a lot of people ride flat pedals. Yeah. And I get it. It's definitely a nice setup, and I could see transitioning to that someday if we were riding a lot of Sedona, Moab, Utah, whatever.
Yeah,
but for us,
clipped in pretty loose too, so I can get out fairly easy, but I still get enough benefit from it that I do prefer riding.
I've even found too, as I'm doing less cross-country riding, I mean, we're still riding cross-country, but in general, less serious cross-country riding, I should say, I've loosened mine up as well, so they're not so insanely tight. I'd rather have them come out occasionally, which doesn't really even happen. I don't find that I fall out accidentally ever.
Yeah, I think for us, we were trying to find a bike that is kind of impossible, but something that can sort of do it all a little bit, right? So we can ride cross-country, we can go to Sedona and still enjoy it, and I think this bike kind of does that pretty well. I mean, it's really enjoyable to ride uphill cross-country type stuff where you just need to grind it out and pedal. It's really efficient. And coming from stuff that was very, very efficient, I have to say this bike, to me, feels much more comfortable and more efficient that way to me, just because of the comfort. It's light. You don't feel like you're dragging anything big uphill. So I've been super, super impressed with this bike, and looking forward to doing stuff like Sedona as well. I think we I
know that these bikes can handle that as well. So we're both excited to do that. And then like Kelsey was saying, when you go with a fairly lightweight full suspension, you'll find that you stay seated and pedaling through some choppy stuff. Whereas on a rigid or a hardtail, you're going to get up off the seat, and usually then you stop pedaling or you start pounding on the pedals and standing and pedaling. But I do love that on this bike you can just stay seated, let the suspension do its job, and keep cruising on through. So we've been absolutely in love with these bikes. I think I've sort of tuned the suspension and had it set up. There's great videos online with much smarter people than me to walk you through that, but we basically followed those procedures and what Revel recommends to sort of dial in the bikes. And I would say I'm close. I could put a little more pressure in the rear shock, and then I think you could take a little bit out, just because of our weight differential being so great. But I think that's it. There was nothing else on this bike that I would change that I can really think of. I could consider doing carbon bars. Bars on mountain bikes these days are super wide, and for the way we ride, I could either cut these down maybe a ½ inch on each end and make it a little bit skinnier bar, or I could go with a carbon bar from one of my old bikes, because carbon does tend to absorb that little bit of chatteriness. And I think if I tune the suspension out perfectly, it should take care of that regardless. But that's the only thing I would consider doing. And on their higher end builds, it comes with carbon bars.
Again, we just got the very base model.
Base model, but in an
it's
insanely
not a base bike.
And so it is a very high-end bike. So keep that in mind. That kind of summarizes these. We're going to head out for a ride right now. So thanks for coming along.
Let us know in the comments below if you have any questions about the bikes or anything that we talked about. And
let me know what your dream bike is. For me, this is it, I think, really. It's the bike that I can still keep up with my old cross-country friends with, so I don't feel like they're dropping me. And a bike that I can still go with the other friends who enjoy more of the downhill stuff in Sedona. And I used to try and keep up with them on a rigid sometimes and could almost do it. And then with this, I mean, so much better for that kind of thing. So.
We love them.
All right. See you next time.
Thanks for watching.